What are the major drawbacks of fiscal policy? The first one is crowding out effect. Let's assume that we have a recession. Consequently, we are going to apply an expansionary fiscal policy, which means increasing government spending. So this means that once we increase government spending, this would result in higher budget deficit because our government spending will be bigger than our government revenue. Consequently, the government needs to borrow. Once the government will increase the borrowing, it means that liquidity in the market will be lower. Therefore, interest rate will be higher. If interest rate will be higher, this means that there isn't enough money left for investors and the cost of debt, the cost of borrowing will be higher. Consequently, investment will drop. Therefore, as you see here, we have a negative relationship between interest rate and investment. If real interest rate goes up, investment will go down, which we call it crowding out effect. Why do we call it crowding out effect? Because the government will crowd out for the available liquidity. Therefore, the government will take the liquidity and it will end up that the investors, they end up with less liquidity. Therefore, because of this crowding out effect, when we increase G, you discover that investment will decrease. Remember that our GDP based on expenditure approach is consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. So here G will be higher, but investment at the same time will be lower. Therefore, our second drawback will be is we discover that we overestimate the multiplier effect. Why? Because we will increase G, multiplier will be higher, but not by a big amount. Why? Let's draw it. On our x-axis we have our output, in our y-axis we have our price level. So this is our aggregate demand one. And here we have our price level and we have our output one. Let's assume that the government is going to use an expansionary fiscal policy and increase government spending. So our aggregate demand curve will shift to the right to aggregate demand 2. Then we will have here higher output. But also because of the multiplier effect, so our aggregate demand will keep shifting to the right with a bigger shift here, and we will have aggregate demands 3, and this will be our output, which is Y3. But remember that the crowding out effect, every time we increase G, real interest rate will be higher, consequently investment will be lower. Therefore, I know that aggregate demand will shift to the left. Therefore, because of the crowding out effect, the aggregate demand curve will shift to the left, and now we will have a lower output at Y4. Therefore, we know that the Keynesians usually overestimate the effect of the multiplier. Therefore, we could say that the fiscal stimulus effects are small, short-lived, and slow to be useful. Consequently, what will be the expansionary fiscal policy, or what we call it as a fiscal stimulus, durable results are higher government spending, lower potential output, lower real GDP growth rate, and higher debt burden on future generation because we increased our budget deficit. Consequently, we increase our debt level that will be paid by future generations.